Welcome to the SUNY Potsdam Library's tutorial on academic authority and authoritative sources. In this video, we'll discuss the concept of authority, why it's so important to locate authoritative sources for your work, and how you can go about doing so. When you're doing research at the college level, you don't just need to find sources, you need to find authoritative ones. When you're researching a topic, it's not enough to just grab the first thing you find and run with it. You need to be sure it's a source created by someone with a level of expertise in the field who really knows their stuff. As the Association of College and Research Libraries says, quote, "Information resources reflect their creators' expertise and credibility and are evaluated based on the information need and the context in which the information will be used." So what does an authoritative source look like? Well, authoritative sources are created by people or organizations that have a demonstrable expertise in the field and can be trusted to convey worthwhile, factual, and objective information. Objectivity is important. We should aim to avoid biased sources because how can we trust the information they convey if they're invested in the topic? Can we trust a politician to pass meaningful climate change legislation if they're taking money from an oil company? Or a judge to rule impartially in a case in which she has a financial stake? Of course not. And neither can we fully trust a source that is biased to one side of an issue or the other. It's also important to recognize that authority can change over time due to new advances or changing views, which render old authority obsolete. Years ago, the idea that Christopher Columbus discovered America was considered so authoritative that it was taught to nearly every child in every school in this country. Now, not so much, since a current authority on the subject would ask, how can someone discover a place where Native Americans had been living for tens of thousands of years? In a similar vein, in the 1940s and 50s, it was common for doctors to use their medical authority to endorse cigarettes. Lucky Strikes bragged about doctors declaring they were less irritating than other brands, while one of Camel's main advertising slogans was, "More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette." Times change, new facts are discovered, and I don't think you'll find too many doctors willing to risk their authority to endorse cigarettes these days. Now let's think about the last half of that quote from the Library Association. Information resources are evaluated based on the information need and the context in which the information will be used. Need and context are key. Why do you need this information, and how are you going to use it? There's a big difference in the level of authority you need from a source for a reasonably trivial piece of information, like how to beat a certain boss in Elden Ring, and a more significant piece of information, like a source for a research paper on which much of your grade might depend. In the first case, you can probably get by with a simple online search. But in the second, you want to be sure you're drawing from someone with real authority in the field you're researching. It's also important to remember that authority isn't a one-size-fits-all situation. No one person is an authority on everything, and beware anybody who claims they are. So you need to find different authorities for different information needs. And when doing so, you need to be sure to go to someone with the right kind of expertise so you'll get the appropriate authority you're seeking. For instance, if you're looking for hard data on climate change, you go to a climate scientist, not a politician or just some guy on the internet. But on the other hand, if you want to know what's going on in a particular neighborhood, you might want to talk to a community leader who actually lives there, rather than a sociologist who might have general theories but not specific information. Or we can just take a lesson from 30 Rock.
We have to call an ambulance. Listen to me, damn it, I'm a doctor.
Of history. In what emergency would you be necessary? If someone wanted to know whether the 60s were awesome or not?
They were.
So as that example shows, there are a lot of different kinds of authority. Alan Alda's character is a doctor, sure, and one you might go to if you want to know if the 60s were awesome, but he's not the right kind if you think somebody's had a heart attack. And just as there are different types of authority, there are different types of sources with their own levels of authority too. When looking at the news, for instance, there are differences in authority between an organization focused on simply reporting facts, like the Associated Press, and ones that have a clearly biased viewpoint, such as Fox News or the Huffington Post. Because unbiased sources like the AP are objective, and lack obvious political agendas, they carry greater authority than those, like Fox News or the Huffington Post, that do have their own agendas. Likewise, there are differences between an article in a popular entertainment magazine, like 17 or Game Informer, a popular news magazine, like Time or the New Yorker, and a peer-reviewed scholarly journal, like the Journal of American History or Nature. When it comes to academic topics, peer-reviewed journals carry the greatest authority. But all of these sources have their purposes. If you're researching the year's new fashions for young women, you're going to go to 17, not the Journal of American History. But if you need an article for an academic research paper on biology, a scholarly journal like Nature is definitely the way to go. Thus, authority is about context and need. What do you need this information for, and how are you going to use it? Now, when we're consuming information, it's on each of us to determine if the sources we're using are worthy of our trust. And there are some easy steps you can take to figure this out. For one, go online and look up the author of the material. What are their credentials? Do they have advanced degrees in the subject you're researching, or long experience in the field that makes them an expert? If they're a professor, it's likely they'll have a profile on their university's website that will include their academic background, publications, and other markers that prove their knowledge. If you're using a strictly online source, it might not have an author listed, so look into the organization that published the information. What's the purpose of the organization? Is it a news agency that's just focused on presenting facts? Or is it a think tank, a political action committee, or a commercial endeavor like a corporation, which all have their own agendas? In addition, when reading the source, do you find it to be objective, or is there obvious bias? Ask yourself if the creator of the information is getting something out of publishing this source. Are they selling something, trying to convince you to vote a certain way, or are they just conveying information? The more biased they are, the more involved they are in the subject at hand, the less trustworthy their information and thus less valuable the source. Also, remember that a truly authoritative source won't expect you to simply take its word at face value. Instead, it will tell you where it's drawing its information from. Academic sources should include citations, whether in text, like footnotes or parenthetical notations, or through a bibliography that lists all the works that the source used. One of the reasons citations are included is so that a reader like you can check up on them and make sure your source is using them correctly. It's frankly suspicious if a source doesn't have citations, because then you have no idea where it's getting its information from or how it's coming to its conclusions. And if you don't know that, how can you tell if it's worthy of being granted authority on the subject? Many of these tips are contained in the CRAP test, which stands for Currency, Relevance, Authority, Accuracy, and Purpose. The CRAP test is the subject of its own video from the Crum Library, so I won't go into depth about it here, but information can be found on our Fake News Library Guide at library.potsdam.edu/fake-news. Regardless of what techniques you use to establish the authority of your source, the simple reality is that, like pretty much everything else, it takes practice to get really good at figuring this stuff out. If you're struggling to determine whether a source is authoritative, you can always ask a librarian or your professor for help. That's what we're here for. Authority is a slippery thing to establish and understand, but the more you do it, the easier it will get and the better you'll get at it. And hopefully, it becomes second nature to you, so you'll still be assessing the authority and trustworthiness of the information you consume long after you've graduated from Potsdam.